The US debt ceiling is rapidly approaching, and we're going to hit it by mid-October if something isn't done. And like every few years when this issue comes up, it stirs up the debate of what exactly should be done about the debt ceiling. That beckons the question of what is the debt ceiling and what happens if we hit it. I'm Bradford, the penny pincher guy, the personal finance. First, make sure you give the video a like so we know to make more like it. So what is the debt ceiling and why does it need to be constantly raised? The debt ceiling, it is a ceiling on the max amount of debt that the federal government is able to take out, whether through selling bonds or taking out loans from various governments around the world. And the reason that we constantly keep hitting that ceiling and need to raise it is because the federal government is almost always operating at a budget deficit. Now, the federal deficit and the federal debt are both related, but they are distinctly different things. Federal debt, on one hand, is the total amount of money that the US government owes, while as the deficit is the amount of money that is being spent over and above what revenues are generated for any given year. So the deficit is how much money we are taking out extra for a given year, and the debt is the total amount of money that the federal government owns. At this point in time, it's just shy of $30 trillion. When talking about trillions of dollars, that is such a large number that it's really hard to wrap your mind around. So let's take off a few zeros and make it a lot more relatable. Say you're an individual that makes $100,000 a year. That would be representative of the amount of income through taxes and tariffs that the federal government raises. Now, the expenditures that create the deficit would say if you're that individual making $100,000 a year, but you spend $125,000 every single year. The first year you do that, that means your deficit is $25,000 as well as your debt is $25,000. But as you repeat that process year after year, you're going to continue adding that extra $25,000 in deficit onto the total debt that you owe. So after 10 years, that would be $250,000 in total debt from having an annual deficit of $25,000. Now, in reality, there is no bank on the face of planet Earth that would continue to lend you money if you show you are that irresponsible with your spending and continue to vastly overspend what you bring in every year. But hey, it's Congress. And if they didn't do that, there wouldn't be jokes about spending like you're in Congress. Now, the original reason that we have a debt ceiling at all goes all the way back to the founding of the country, when Congress was initially required for every time they wanted to raise some money, they needed to pass a specific bill saying how that money was going to be spent. But over time and throughout the centuries, bringing us into the 21st century, those bills and the regulations got more and more relaxed. So eventually, by the time we get to where we are now, the debt ceiling doesn't require a specific appropriation bill for saying how that additional debt is going to be spent. All it requires is that Congress comes together and passes a bill saying that the debt ceiling has been increased. And the reason why we still have a debt ceiling at all is that in theory, it is supposed to force Congress to either reel in spending or pass measures to increase taxes to be able to bring in more revenue to discourage the federal government from continually taking out debt over and over and over again. But that's more of a pipe dream, considering that the federal government has operated in a deficit for almost the last 20 years. And even before then, in the preceding centuries, there were only a couple years at a time in any given couple set of decades where we were actually operating at a budget surplus. So we were bringing in more revenue from taxes than we were spending with the federal budget. With all of that in mind, what happens if we actually hit the debt ceiling or exceed it? Well, if you follow the news, you know that the world is going to end, an asteroid is going to come from outer space, and we're all going to die. That is massively exaggerated. It's not like the government is just going to cease to exist, stop functioning entirely, and we're going to devolve into complete anarchy. What actually is going to happen is because the government is still bringing in money through taxation and the tariffs and the various sources of revenue that it generates, so it's still bringing in money. But once we hit that debt ceiling, the government is no longer allowed to take out new debt to be able to fund new projects moving forward. All the projects that have already been appropriated with their funds are going to continue to be paid, and those functions will continue to operate, as well as everything that is considered a vital or a necessary employee, such as the military, the post office, and a lot of the major functions of government that we really rely upon to continue operating is going to happen. Now, previous times where we've had issues with the budget not being passed, or we had the issue of raising the debt ceiling, what's happened before is if the budget wasn't passed, for example, and the biggest time that this happened was with the sequestration back during the Obama administration, is that the military and a lot of federal workers that were considered to be vital and necessary, the ones that weren't, were furloughed for a certain period of time, And then the workers that were required to continue working either operated without pay or were furloughed until the budget was passed again, at which point everybody, whether they were furloughed or they continued to work without pay, was given back pay for that entire period of time. So while the world isn't going to end if we hit the debt ceiling and we don't raise it, what is going to happen is the government is going to have to take austerity measures. It's going to have to choose with what it is going to spend its current revenue, because it can't take out new debt, and what it is going to put that money towards. In all likelihood, it's going to be forced to take the money that it currently has to be able to pay the interest on the almost $30 trillion worth of debt that we already have. Because what happens if they don't pay that money would be that the government defaults on its loans. And that is a story for another day, but that would be very, very bad. So the government would have to withdraw spending in a variety of different areas, like what we saw with back in the sequestration about 10 years ago, is they cut a lot of money from the military to be able to continue funding other areas so the deficit wouldn't be as bad the following year. An additional thing that I want to address is that Social Security checks, they're not all just going to dry up either, and everybody on a fixed income isn't going to starve. Those checks are going to continue to be pushed out. Is there a possibility that the size of those checks will be cut, at least for a period of time? That is a possibility. We really don't know what is going to happen if we hit the debt ceiling because it hasn't happened before. We've always raised the debt ceiling or passed some sort of continuing resolution so that we can temporarily take out more debt until Congress is able to come together and kick the can down the road another couple years. So while we don't know exactly what is going to happen, I think it's safe to say that the world isn't going to end, and it's not going to be as bad as you see some news anchors pretend that it's going to be. I think that gives you a good definition of what the US debt ceiling is and what we could kind of expect to happen if we actually hit it without it being raised or having some sort of continuing resolution. It's certainly not a good thing for the US debt ceiling to be hit. It's also not the end of the world that you've heard on some of the news networks. But what do you think should happen? Should we just continue to raise the debt ceiling? Or on the other hand, should we actually suspend the debt ceiling altogether so we don't run into this issue? Or option number 3 that I don't think is ever going to happen because no politicians stand behind cutting programs so we can actually operate at a budget surplus. Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching today, and as always, just remember to pinch a little. Thanks for watching, and if you liked this video, make sure to check out the video that's on the left-hand side of your screen.
Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like more great content, and to support our channel.